Now we know that there are 5 Godhand members in Berserk, but what we don't know is the order that they came in. We know that Void came first and that Griffith came last, but we have no idea who came second, third, and fourth. Well, in this video, I'm going to take a speculative guess based on historical information that I think may have played a role in the influences for these specific Godhand members. Now, let's start with the obvious one first, and it's going to be Void. Now, I think the historical event that coincides with Void's rise to power is going to be the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire represented the epitome of imperial ambitions. The Romans conquered their adversaries with superior battle tactics and harsh discipline. Soldiers were subjugated to physical labor to maintain their strength, build up their subordination, and ensure close bonds with their fellow men. As a result, Rome subjugated many nations and established an empire encompassing the entire continent. Now, it seems that Mira used the Roman Empire as a template for Geiseric's kingdom. When we look at the structures and statues of the late Geiseric's kingdom at the bottom of the Tower of Rebirth, it has a distinct Roman flair. The same can be said for Griffith's kingdom, which emulates Geiseric's kingdom. Now, of course, all empires come to their eventual demise. The fall of the Roman Empire can be traced to many contributing factors, but one of note is the erosion from Christianity. During the Principate, Roman emperors were seen as gods, but with the conversion to Christianity, there was only one god, thus diminishing the emperor's claims at divinity and lessening his authority across the region. In addition, Christianity fissured the empire into religious lines. When we compare this to Berserk, Geiseric imprisoned a sage, most likely Void, in the Tower of Conviction for dissenting against the kingdom. The sage would henceforth proclaim the sins of Geiseric to God until the angels were made to descend down and tear the kingdom asunder. Void, most likely, was a religious leader who brought the Holy See to prominence in his time, much like Christianity was brought to prominence during the fall of Rome. Therefore, the fall of Geiseric's kingdom seems to mimic the fall of Rome. Now, the fall of Rome occurred in 476 AD, and approximately 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, we had the end of the 100 Years' War between England and France. This coincides with the 100 Years' War between the Midland and Tudor armies, and this establishes the birth of Void and Griffith as Godhand members. It gives us a reasonable timeline to work with to postulate who would have come next in the Godhand timeline. Because as we know, Charlotte said that the fall of Geiseric's kingdom was 1,000 years prior. And because the fall of Rome was 1,000 years prior to the 100 Years' War, we can kind of use that same timeline for the other Godhand members. Now, an important detail to consider before moving forward is that the eclipse occurs every 216 years. If we trace this backwards from Griffith's eclipse to Void's, we only get 864 years. A couple things to keep in mind. Charlotte says it was roughly 1,000 years ago, but it was left rather ambiguous. Secondly, the dates and time periods used throughout Berserk are anachronistic, so Mira takes elements from many different time periods and creates his own unique universe. So try not to get too hung up about the particulars in terms of the dates and times. Things are intended to be more relative in terms of the date and times. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Western Europe entered the Dark Ages, or the early Middle Ages. This epoch was characterized by short lifespans and brutish living conditions. Upward movement was impossible, and the life of a woman was met with severe restrictions. Even if a woman was part of nobility, she best stay true to her husband or face severe consequences. While men of nobility had mistresses in addition to their wives, women who committed adultery were either killed or forced into becoming a nun. Slan, being a Godhand member of Lust, most likely committed adultery during her mortal days, and was forced into being a nun. Her defiance is encapsulated by her state of undress, merely wearing a corset that comically doesn't cover any of her private areas. It's also interesting that she enjoyed Guts' cannon going through her body, especially liking the heat of the cannon, indicating that she was probably sentenced to death by burning in her mortal days. The next major historical event that we have is the Crusades. The Crusades were a series of religious wars between Christians and Muslims that lasted roughly 200 years. Pope Urban II kicked off the Crusades in November of 1095 by calling for a war of liberation. He tells a story about Christians being attacked on their way to Jerusalem to invigorate the people. Though killing is strictly forbidden by the Ten Commandments, Pope Urban II promised that anyone who went on a crusade was guaranteed a place in heaven. One of his famous quotes goes as follows: "Christians, hasten to help your brothers in the East, for they are being attacked. Arm for the rescue of Jerusalem under your captain, Christ. Wear his cross as your badge. If you are killed, your sins will be pardoned. This sort of propaganda is in line with Ubic's deceptive personality, especially considering how he was the one who tricked Griffith to submit himself to the idea of evil. In addition, when we think of an artful person, they are clever, skillful, or cunning. The next historical event we have is the Black Death, otherwise known as the Great Mortality, the Plague, and the Pestilence. It is estimated that 75 to 200 million people died, with a mortality rate between 30 to 50% of infected victims. The plague spread through fleas on black rats, and it caused tumors, acute fever, and vomiting of blood. The Roman Catholic Church explained the plague as God punishing the sins of the people. It henceforth instructed people to pray and organize religious marches, pleading to God to halt the pestilence. Physicians advise people to avoid exercise and bathing, which may explain why Conrad is obese. Because the plague was considered an act of punishment from God, large groups of flagellants roamed the countryside dragging crosses while whipping themselves. The idea of this extreme penance was to drive away the disease, but it didn't work, and the wounds incurred only made your death more painful. During the conviction arc, we see Moscas practicing self-flagellation, possibly in honor of Conrad, and we even see a collection of rats taking the shape of Conrad's head. What's interesting about Conrad's face is that his mouth is fixed to a strange position. If he did practice self-flagellation, it's possible that this is the face he made when he was in extreme pain. And now on to the 100 Years' War, which obviously coincides with Griffith. Now, there are quite a few parallels between the 200 Years' War, but the one of note is between Griffith and Joan of Arc. From the age of 13, Joan of Arc experienced visions of the Archangel Michael, Saint Margaret, and Saint Catherine of Alexandria. These visions told her to go against the English. Griffith aspired to attain his own kingdom and had a vision of archangels while in his prison cell, although for different reasons. Though Joan was a peasant girl, she experienced great military success through her aggressive military tactics. Griffith, likewise, was born of humble origins and was a military savant on the battlefield. And both Joan and Griffith had relatively short military careers, as they were captured at a young age. While Joan wasn't tortured in prison, she was placed in leg irons and was under constant verbal and mental abuse. She even mentions that prison guards wanted to rape her. As for Griffith, he experienced intense torture in which his body was desecrated from top to bottom. So if we base it on the time periods, that would be my speculative guess as to how the God Hand came into being. First being Void, second Slan, third Ubic, fourth Conrad, and fifth Griffith. The one through line is that each period has some connection with Christianity or a person of the Christian faith. The Holy See of Berserk mimics the spread of Christianity and the control of the people from a central governing body, something Shirka picked up on. The current doctrine of the Holy See is nothing more than a tool by which to display its own political power. People invoke the name of God when going to war. They invoke the name of God seeking salvation, over and over, never tiring, when the key that saves them may be hidden in the very ones they are trying to forget.